I recently became obsessed with the goats in Severance. So much so, I had to make my own little low-poly goat model, or else goats would be the only thing that I ever thought about again. Let's see how I made this little beast. And here we are, folks. We're back with my very best friend, the Blender default cube. So when I'm working on these models, I've found that the best thing that I can possibly do for myself in the very beginning of the process is just to focus on blocking out the simplest, most complete, basic version of the animal possible, and kind of as quickly as I can. That's typically not maybe good advice for making art, trying to go as fast as you can, but in this case, like in the early stages of making a 3D model, just trying to quickly make the most basic thing I can keeps my momentum up, and it's like it allows my brain to just keep moving forward, which is so crucial for someone like me. Like in the early stages of a new model, if I start thinking too much about, oh, the head shouldn't be shaped like that, it's not quite right, or the legs look wrong, I'll start focusing on that detail way too much and for just way too long, and it probably still will not end up looking quite right at that point if I do allow myself to fixate on something like the dimensions of the head or the contour of the legs. So I get frustrated, and then I look at the rest of the model to try and, kind of change subjects mentally, and then I look at the rest of the model and there's not even a finished rough draft or anything really at all, and I get more frustrated and my brain just kind of shuts down and I stop really making any kind of forward progress on the model. So instead, I try to just make the simplest, probably worst version of the model and then refine from there. I've been getting into writing short stories lately as a hobby, and it's funny just like how our approaches to different art forms and hobbies and stuff can kind of mix with each other. Like with writing, I try to write out the most basic beginning to end idea that I can with the expectation that it will not do any kind of justice to the initial idea that I was really excited about, and also with the expectation that I'll probably be like embarrassed of what I've written by the time I've finished the first draft. But it's okay, because it's just about getting something finished that you can work with and revise and edit and refine with time, just like with 3D modeling. And that has brought me the most success so far in terms of actually just being able to complete an idea and bring something to life. You can see here that I start fiddling around with the shape of the goat's head a lot here. The shape of the goat's head was probably the most difficult part of this model for me, unexpectedly. Usually on quadrupeds like this, the hind legs are always going to be the hardest part, but for some reason I found it very difficult to not only comprehend the shape of a goat's head, but then to also simplify it as much as I could for, a low poly model. I think that it's just because of the way that the eyes are situated. Their eyes and eye sockets just protrude in a very distinctive kind of way that's, I found hard to recreate without adding, hard to recreate within the confines of minimal poly count, minimal adding of more and more geometry to make curves and more complicated shapes like that. So I had to mess around with that on and off throughout the entire modeling process. You will see the eyes and the head shape routinely come back to haunt me throughout really this entire time lapse. But as I mentioned before, typically the hind legs are the biggest problem for me when I model a quadruped. I was really proud of how these ones turned out with minimal toiling. I think if I were to start this model over, I would definitely change my approach to the actual ear shape. I adjust them on and off throughout the process because they didn't quite look right. They just made the goat look very calf-like. Part of that might have been just because my goat didn't have the distinctive little goat nose painted onto the model yet. Or it might have been just because when I initially modeled the ears, they were just coming out straight from the sides of the head, like they were exactly perpendicular to the goat's head. And goats, like a lot of the time, their ears are just angled upward more. But I think would have helped even more would be if I had taken a second to just draw the actual shape of the ears on a notepad, in a sketchbook, anything. I think that would have helped make the shape make a lot more sense to me in 3D space much faster. Like the base of a goat's ear, like, they're a lot more straight than what I was expecting. Their ears are also a lot more narrow than what I originally created. Like, even now, they just look huge to me in the time lapse. But yeah, I think their ears just have a much more straight angles, kind of, but the curves that are there are just, I think, a lot more subtle than what I initially modeled. I always like to read about the animal that I'm modeling in folklore and mythology for just like ideas for things I can incorporate. But more recently, I've been reading lots of fairy tales, and the Brothers Grimm actually collected a couple of fairy tales featuring goats. I was already familiar with the Three Billy Goats Gruff. I think that story is more well known, but the one I was not familiar with is called The Wolf and the Seven Little Kids. Kids, of course, being baby goats. A lot of fairy tales have this dreamlike quality where I cannot possibly fathom what's coming next, and this one, I just want to read it for y'all now. The Wolf and the Seven Little Kids, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. There was once an old goat who had 7 little ones, and was as fond of them as every mother was of her children. One day she had to go into the wood to fetch food for them, so she called them all around her. "Dear children," said she, "I'm going out into the wood, and while I'm gone, be on your guard against the wolf, for if he were once to get inside, he would eat you up, skin, bones, and all. The rich often disguises himself, but he may also be known by his hoarse voice and black paws." "Dear mother," answered the kids, "you need not be afraid. We will take good care of ourselves." And the mother bleated goodbye and went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before someone came knocking at the house door and crying out, "Open the door, my dear children, your mother has come back and has brought each of you something." But the little kids knew it was the wolf by the hoarse voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a delicate and sweet voice, and your voice is hoarse. You must be the wolf." Then off the wolf went to a shop and bought a big lump of chalk and ate it up to make his voice soft. And then he came back, knocked at the house door, and cried, "Open the door, my dear children, your mother is here and has brought each of you something." But the wolf had put his black paws against the window, and the kids, seeing this, cried out, "We will not open the door. Our mother has no black paws like you. You must be the wolf." And the wolf ran to a baker. "Baker," said he, "I am hurt in the foot. Pray spread some dough over the place." And when the baker had plastered his feet, he ran over to the miller. "Miller," said he, "strew me some white meal over my paws." But the miller refused, thinking the wolf must be meaning harm to someone. "If you don't do it," cried the wolf, "I'll eat you up." And the miller was afraid and did as he was told. And that just shows what men are. And now came the rogue the 3rd time to the door and knocked. "Open, children," cried he. "Your dear mother has come home and brought you each something from the wood." "First show us your paws," said the kids, "so that we may know if you are really our mother or not." And he put up his paws against the window, and when they saw that they were white, all seemed right, and they opened the door. And when he was inside, they saw it was the wolf, and they were terrified and tried to hide themselves. One ran under the table, the 2nd got into the bed, the 3rd into the oven, the 4th in the kitchen, the 5th in the cupboard, and the 6th under the sink, the 7th in the clock case. But the wolf found them all, and gave them short shrift. One after the other he swallowed down, all but the youngest, who was hid in the clock case. And so the wolf, having got what he wanted, strolled forth into the green meadows, and laying himself down under a tree, he fell asleep. Not long after, the mother goat came back from the wood, and oh, what a sight met her eyes. The door was standing wide open, table, chairs, and stools all thrown about, dishes broken, quilt and pillows torn off the bed. She sought her children. They were nowhere to be found. She called to each of them by name, but nobody answered, until she came to the name of the youngest. "Here I am, mother," a little voice cried, "here, in the clock case." And so she helped him out, and heard how the wolf had come, and eaten all the rest. And you may think how she cried for the loss of her dear children. At last in her grief she wandered out of doors, and the youngest kid with her, and when they came into the meadow, there they saw the wolf lying under a tree, and snoring so that the branches shook. The mother goat looked at him carefully on all sides, and she noticed how something inside his body was moving and struggling. "Dear me," thought she, "can it be that my poor children that he devoured for his evening meal are still alive?" And she sent the little kid back to the house for a pair of shears, and needle and thread. Then she cut the wolf's body open, and no sooner had she made one snip than out came the head of one of the kids, and then another snip, and then one after the other the 6 little kids all jumped out alive and well, for in his greediness the rogue had swallowed them down whole. How delightful this was! So they comforted their dear mother and hopped about like tailors at a wedding. Now fetch some good hard stones, said the mother, and we will fill his body with them as he lies asleep. And so they fetched some in all haste, and put them inside him, and the mother sewed him up so quickly again that he was none the wiser. When the wolf at last awoke and got up, the stones inside him made him feel very thirsty, and as he was going to the brook to drink, they struck and rattled it one against another, and so he cried out, "What is this I feel inside me knocking hard against my bones? How should such a thing betide me? They were kids, and now they're stones." So he came to the brook and stooped to drink, but the heavy stones weighed him down, so he fell over into the water and was drowned. And when the 7 little kids saw it, they came up running. "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" they cried, and taking hands, they danced with their mother all about the place. So that's what I've been reading. Back to 3D modeling for a moment. For the hooves, I initially planned to just kind of paint the cleft bit of the hoof onto the texture instead of actually adjusting the topology like this and adding a couple more loop cuts. That definitely would have been the lowest poly solution, just painting kind of a dark mark on the front of the hoof to just suggest the presence of the cleft part, but I just preferred having his little hooves actually be split in the geometry like this, so sometimes we just add some more triangles. So the fairy tales involving goats were baffling, but the vegetable lamb of Tartary was something else entirely. Of course, they're not a goat, but they're related and just way too interesting to not include. The vegetable lamb of Tartary, the idea is that this is a lamb that grows out of a plant. It's part plant, part sheep. The sheep is attached to the plant via sort of umbilical stem cord, and the lamb seems to remain attached to the plant, feeding on surrounding foliage. I should have said this at the beginning, I forgot. This is a medieval kind of folklore mythological creature, but to quote from the Wikipedia page about it, "When all accessible foliage was gone, both the plant and the sheep died. Underlying the legend is the cotton plant, which was unknown in Northern Europe before the Norman conquest of Sicily." So just really fantastic to not know what a cotton plant is and then to come up with this creature. They're considered something called a zoophyte, which basically is a creature that is simultaneously both plant and animal. The term is obsolete now, I read. It sounds like a cryptid type of thing, but the term used to be used to refer to a lot of animals like coral, sea anemones, and sponges. Reading about zoophytes really struck me because I do feel like I still perceive coral, sea anemones, sponges as a sort of plant animal thing, even though intellectually I know that corals, sea anemones, sponges, all of them are of course animals. There's also a book from 1887 titled The Vegetable Lamb of Tartary, A Curious Fable of the Cotton Plant, written by Henry Lee, which I immediately added to my reading list. It sounds like it traces the origin of the medieval myth, how it evolved over time, and just kind of considers the relationship between truth and folklore. Sounds excellent. I can't wait to read it. Some of the illustrations on the wiki for The Vegetable Lamb of Tartary really remind me of the Annihilation movie adaptation. Anyway, not a goat specifically, but I just had to share this because it's by far my favorite bit of mythology or folklore that I've come across recently. Just really great stuff. I do have another mythic or folklore creature. This one is goat specific. They are the dahu. They look a lot like a mountain goat or maybe an ibex, but the legs on the left and the right sides of their body are of different lengths. Both legs on the right side are long and both legs on the left side are short. This is so they can easily scale the mountains that they live on, but only in one direction. So there are two varieties, each with the long legs either on the left side or the right side. I don't remember what the actual term was for the two different varieties of dahus, but I've heard them called either a clockwise or a counterclockwise dahu, depending on which side of their body they had long legs on. It seemed like dahus are maybe a well-known folklore figure in both France and French-speaking Switzerland. People may joke about dahu hunts in the same way that Americans may joke about a snipe hunt, which, if you're not familiar, basically means a hunt for a creature that does not exist. It might be done as a prank on kids, or someone might just say that as a figure of speech. Dahus also seem to have a lot of passionate fans. There's a small mountain town in France that was named a Dahu sanctuary, where hunting and photography were forbidden in 1967. And I am thrilled to report that there is a similar folklore creature of the American variety called a side-hill gouger. They also live on mountainsides and have long legs on one side of the body, short legs on the other. The side-hill gouger is a lot less specific than a dahu. They are said to resemble, quote, anything from a pangolin to a goat to a human to a bear. So anything, really. Quote, when a clockwise gouger meets a counterclockwise gouger, they have to fight to the death since they can only go in one direction. There's also a landform called a terracet. It's a type of ridges found on mountainsides. Some attribute them to gougers since they, wind around the mountains constantly and carve paths into them. Gougers are also thought to have originated in New England, but were able to migrate west, quote, a feat accomplished by a pair of gougers who clung to each other in a fashion comparable to a pair of drunks going home from town with their long legs on the outer sides. There's also a specific type of gouger in Vermont called a wampahoofus. Apparently, farmers crossbred cows with gougers so they could graze their cows on mountainsides. I love this creature so much. Of all the American cryptids that I am familiar with, I've never heard of a side-hill gouger, and I'm so glad that I know now. I'm a big fan of them, definitely. For this model, of course, I didn't have to do very much texture painting since I'm just modeling a little white goat baby today, but I did have to texture the eyes a little bit. The eyes are an interesting challenge. Goats have really interesting eyes with oblong rectangular pupils, and while typically I don't texture the eyes on my models or do really anything but give them big spherical Beanie Baby eyes, I knew for a goat I would have to make an exception. For the eyes, I knew I needed the color of the iris, and I just need to paint on the pupil shape. I'd also want a little bit of black showing around the edge of the outside of the iris, just to so you can think, well, there's the rest of the eye, or there's kind of the eyelid, that sort of thing. So I marked a seam around where I knew the pupil would be, so I would have an area to paint it on, but just a bit of the area outside the iris would remain completely black, just to look like, again, that outer edge of the iris or the eyelid. This did lead me to reading up about goat eyes and why they actually look like that a little bit. So I read that a study by UC Berkeley and Durham University actually linked horizontal and vertical pupil shapes among different animals to, quote, the ecological niche or role of the animal. The general pattern they've found is that predators generally have vertical slit pupils because these help them judge distance better, making it easier to pounce upon prey, for example. Meanwhile, herbivores, the target of carnivores, have rectangular slit pupils as a line of defense, offering them a broader field of vision. For this model, I didn't end up needing to texture paint very much, just the eyes and the nose. Goats have very distinctive noses, so I thought it was very important to make sure I painted that feature on. And for a lot of baby goats, you'll see their pink skin around the outside of their mouths. I tried to paint that on because it's really cute, but he ended up looking like the Joker, so I got rid of that later. When I was doing my reading about goats in mythology and folklore for this video, I kind of forgot about scapegoating. Of course, when we call someone or something a scapegoat, we mean that they're being blamed for the wrongdoing of someone or something else. but that term actually comes from ancient ritual practices. It seems like scapegoat itself might be like the term itself might be sort of a misunderstanding or mistranslation almost. I'm going to read a little bit from a blog post from the Sydney Jewish Museum that explains. The word was coined by a Protestant scholar, William Tyndale, in 1530 when he undertook the task of the first translation of the entire Hebrew Bible into English. A key part of Yom Kippur, as described in the Torah, is the ritual slaughter of 2 goats, one for the Lord, and the other is designated for Azazel. Jewish tradition takes Azazel as the name of a rocky headland off which one goat, having the sins of the community symbolically placed upon it, would be thrown. The other goat, the one for the Lord, would be slaughtered as part of the general Yom Kippur rituals. This slaughter would bring atonement to the community. Tyndale, however, who practiced Christianity, translated Azazel differently. Christian tradition similarly acknowledged that one goat was to be slaughtered for atonement of the community, but the second goat, bearing the community's sins, was understood to have simply gone free, to have escaped. Tyndale named this goat the scapegoat, which evolved later to be used as the, quote, scapegoat. I thought that was fascinating. I knew that the term scapegoat, the phenomenon of scapegoating someone or something, was in reference to an actual like a ritual practice of sacrificing goats. I had no idea 2 goats were involved. I had no idea that the actual term is scapegoat. It sounds like it was thought that the, quote, scapegoat that was, given for Azazel, it seems like it was thought that that goat just got to kind of like run free into the wild, and that's why it was escaping. That is always how it's kind of been explained to me, but it seems like that was maybe a misunderstanding. I also made some extra low poly goats in the form of Papercrafts for Sneepsnorp Club. Sneepsnorp Club is a lot like a Patreon, but it's run from my own website. Some of the rewards include exclusive stickers and papercraft patterns of the creature of the month, and April is, of course, Goat Month. Members also send me animal ideas to model for our monthly live stream. It's a lot of fun. You can find the link to Sneepsnorp Club in the description. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I'm trying to get back into making YouTube videos on a semi-regular basis. If you follow me on my other social media, you may have seen that I'm making a game about a giant isopod, and I'm hoping to do my first devlog about the game soon, once there's more to see and talk about that is actually finished. Bye!